I love strategy RPGs. I grew up playing Shining Force and Shining Force 2 on the Sega Genesis, and when I got a little older, I graduated to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on the GameCube, then Radiant Dawn on the Wii, and then Disgaea, Disgaea 2, and Eternal Poison on the PlayStation 2. I was voracious. The SRPG genre proved a never-ending source of delight for me. And not just playing them. 14 years ago, I actually started making them, beginning with the Flash game Telepath RPG Chapter 2. If you remember that one from Newgrounds.com, then shout out to you. You're old like me. Congratulations. All of which is to say, I care a lot about the SRPG genre. Lately, though, I've noticed that many people seem to have lost all sense of what an SRPG is. A situation I blame on Steam's absolutely terrible tagging system and complete lack of genre curation. So I'm here to talk about what makes a game an SRPG and set the record straight. Chapter 1. Who cares? There's a certain kind of person out there on the internet who hates that game genres exist. They see people arranging games into these little conceptual boxes and they chafe at it. Like, who are you to define the limits of a genre, man? But to that person I would respond, there's a reason we have genres. Genres make it easier to find the games we like. Genre is a way for us to say, hey, there are certain games that share certain characteristics, and I happen to really like how those games play. So we can search for the genre and easily find new games that offer us the general type of experience we want. As long as people use the genre name correctly, it makes finding the games we want way, way easier. This same thing is true of all words, really. Words have accepted definitions, and the fact that they have accepted definitions is what allows us to communicate with each other in the first place. If I tell you I have a chair for sale, and when you show up to buy it, I try to hand you what you understand to be a pineapple, you'd be understandably upset. You'd have just wasted a bunch of time because I'm not using the word chair correctly. And that's a bit like what's happening on Steam right now with strategy RPGs. It has become very hard to find actual strategy RPGs when searching the store by genre. Here are some games Steam has shown me when searching for strategy RPGs. Out of the Park Baseball 25, Football Manager 25, War Hospital, Outland Kingdoms, Town of Salem 2, Persona 3 Reload, Metaphor Refantasio, Reverse 1999, The Matchless Kung Fu, High Fleet, Loop Hero, Punch Club 2, Farmer Against Potatoes, Poker Quest Swords and Spades, Battlecry World at War, Ultimate General Civil War, Doomsday Last Survivors, Suzukuri Dungeon, Dungeons 4, Heroes Hour, Gems of War, Marvel Puzzle Quest, Once Human, A Hero's Rest, and on and on and on. If you still don't care, if you're happy getting your time wasted, being shown a zillion games you're not looking for when searching for SRPGs, then hey, fair enough, you don't have to watch. But for everyone else, stick around and we'll take some steps to try to fix this mess. Chapter 2. What is an RPG? As the name suggests, strategy RPGs are a subgenre of RPGs. So it makes sense for us to start broad and define what makes a game an RPG. Now, quick aside, I'm a lawyer. That's what I do for my day job. And one of the things they teach you when you're studying to become a lawyer is that there are different philosophies judges employ when interpreting the law. Some judges are textualists, which means they just apply the words as written, and they can get really nitpicky about it. Some judges are originalists, meaning that they care about what the authors of the law thought back when it was written. Some judges care more about ensuring that the spirit of the law continues to adapt sensibly to changes in society and technology. Now, I'm not here to lecture you on principles of statutory interpretation. I bring it up only because when you're analyzing an issue, I think it's important to be self-aware about how you're analyzing it. And I see a lot of players just sort of automatically default to a textualist interpretation when they try to come up with a definition of RPG. RPG stands for role-playing game. So a textualist might say, well, if RPG stands for role-playing game, then clearly RPG just means a game where you play a role. A lot of people fall for this approach, but it's a trap. And the reason it's a trap is because it results in a definition that is basically useless. You play a role in just about every game ever made. In Super Mario Bros., you play the role of Mario, a mustachioed Italian plumber. In Half-Life, you play the role of Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist. In Pac-Man, you play the role of a yellow circle thing. You get the picture. If playing a role is all it takes to be an RPG, then 95% of all games ever made become RPGs. And remember what we said back in Chapter 1. The whole point of coming up with a genre definition is to create categories of games that offer experiences in common. If we create a category so broad that it encompasses all games, then there's no point in even doing it to begin with. So we need a different approach. Now, if you want my opinion, and you are watching my video, so I assume that you do, it makes much more sense to let the purpose of the exercise guide our interpretive approach. The purpose of defining a genre is to create a category of games with experiences in common so that we can easily find more of them. And that means our approach should be to find the essential experiential elements shared among those games in particular. Using this approach lets us rule out a lot of false positives pretty quickly. Is an RPG a game that tells a story? Nope. Tons of games tell stories. Call of Duty, Silent Hill, The Secret of Monkey Island, whatever hentai visual novel broke into Steam's top 10 this week. But no one calls these games RPGs, so it ain't story. Is an RPG a game with a fantasy setting? Nope. Tons of games that we all agree are RPGs, like Fallout or Cyberpunk 2077, don't have a fantasy setting. And by the same token, tons of games that we can all agree aren't RPGs, like Golden Axe, Touch Type Tale, or Paladins Champions of the Realm, do have a fantasy setting. So, setting doesn't work as our definition either. Is an RPG a game designed around giving the player different ways to play, and consequences for their gameplay choices? Legendary game designer Tim Kaine thinks so. But as much as I love and respect Mr. Kaine, I have to disagree. This definition excludes pretty much every game that isn't a Western, or W, RPG. Games from every other RPG subgenre, JRPGs, ARPGs, SRPGs, typically don't offer alternative systems for solving problems. Even classic party-based dungeon crawlers like Wizardry wouldn't fit under this definition. But just about everyone agrees that these games are RPGs, so unfortunately we have to reject this definition as well. I could keep going on, but I'm going to save us some time here and cut to the chase. An RPG is a game with one or more persistent, unique characters under the player's control who continually improve over the course of the game as a direct result of the player's actions. That is the common thread that links games as disparate as Dungeon Master, Fallout 4, and Baldur's Gate 3. If you want more details, there's an article I wrote 13 years ago where I explain how I reached this definition. That's linked in the description. Chapter 3. What is an SRPG? Now that we know what an RPG is, it's time to talk about that S we stick in the front. You've been hearing me call these games strategy RPGs, and that is because that's what the S stands for. Strategy. Ironically, though, these really aren't strategy games. Just like with RPGs, if we try to go textualist on this, if we try to figure out what the SRPG genre is about just using the literal meaning of the words, then we're gonna be led astray. Remember, we're trying to create a category of games that play similarly so we can easily find more of them. So the best way to know what SRPGs actually are is to look at the classic games that everyone agrees are SRPGs, then look at the core gameplay elements they all have in common. The first game to popularize the SRPG genre was 1990's Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The following year, an SRPG featuring giant robots called Super Robot Wars came out on the Game Boy, and an SRPG known as Langrisser, or Warsong, depending on where you lived, came out on Sega's Mega Drive. Later that same year, a second Super Robot Wars game released on the NES, and we were off to the races. By 1992, the floodgates had officially opened. Multiple SRPGs began coming out every year without fail. I'm not going to try to list every single SRPG ever made, we'd be sitting here a very long time, but here you can see a decent sampling. Now, I've seen some folks claim that the SRPG genre actually started back in the 1980s with games like Silver Ghost, but I've checked out those games and, in my opinion, they just don't play anything like the games in this list. Since we're looking for games that share core gameplay elements, I think it's fair to say that those games shouldn't be considered. As far as I'm concerned, games of the sort we now refer to as SRPGs started appearing in 1990. So if we look at the history of these types of games, they very consistently have some elements in common. First of all, they're RPGs. I know we covered this point already, but I just have to reiterate, these are games where you command persistent, unique characters, and those characters continually improve over the course of the game as a direct result of your actions. If a character can be replaced with an identical copy at any time, then they're not unique. If characters simply vanish after a map ends without story justification, then they're not persistent. And character improvement needs to be a fairly consistent thing, not something that only happens once or twice over the entire course of the game. And the improvement needs to be inherent to the character, not just them picking up better weapons or armor. With that out of the way, let's talk about the elements of an SRPG in particular. Requirement 1. They're overwhelmingly focused on tactical battles. Despite being called a strategy RPG, it's actually tactics that need to play a central role in the game, not strategy. Tactical battles are the overwhelming focus of every single game on our list above. So let's talk about the difference between strategy and tactics. Strategy means you're handling logistics on a macro scale, managing your economy, harvesting resources, investing them into production, capturing cities, producing troops, researching new spells or technologies. Strategy, put simply, is focused on big picture stuff. Civilization is a strategy game. Crusader Kings is a strategy game. Dwarf Fortress is a strategy game. And then there's tactics. While strategy is all about the macro scale, tactics is its micro-focused counterpart. Where a strategy game might be about setting up your economy to produce a constant flood of troops, a tactics game would be about taking a predefined number of troops and making the absolute most of them. Where a strategy game will have you capturing cities to increase your income and production, a tactics game will have you taking a city to provide a defense boost so your character will survive an engagement. In a strategy game, your characters are pawns, expendable resources to be readily sacrificed in the pursuit of big-picture objectives. In a tactics game, your characters are queens, precious, difficult if not impossible to replace, and to be preserved in all but the most dire scenarios. So from that perspective, it should be pretty obvious why we can't just define SRPG as a game that's both a strategy game and an RPG. If you look at the games that are historically called strategy RPGs, they are overwhelmingly focused, not on strategy, but on tactics. And a side note, this is why you'll sometimes see them referred to as TRPGs. And though that term is technically more accurate, it's also not the dominant term for these games. So I'm just going to stick with SRPG here. Requirement 2. The tactical battles have to take place in environments with 2D or 3D space and varied terrain. Folks who design games have this concept we call possibility space. Possibility space is a lot like what programmers call the state space, meaning the number of possible states the game can be in from its start until completion. Adding a spatial element to a game's combat system opens up a whole new dimension, quite literally in many cases, of possibilities with respect to range, positioning, area of effect, and terrain effects. Even the most simplistic SRPGs benefit enormously from having 2D or 3D battlefields with varying terrain. And when you combine that with the presence of multiple characters who have different combat roles, that's where an SRPG really starts to open up its possibility space. You just can't have an SRPG experience without it. And that brings me to requirement 3. You have to field multiple characters, typically 6 to 12, with distinct combat roles. You can't have chess without all the different pieces. If a game gives you just one character to control for the whole game, then you suddenly have way less to consider when it comes to range, positioning, and interactions with the terrain. And considerations about differing combat roles and how to dole out experience points go right out the window entirely. That radically changes the experience. It might still be a very good game, but at that point, it's not an SRPG. Requirement 4. The battles should be turn-based. I might get some pushback on this one, but I think it's important. The moment you switch the battles to real-time, or real-time with pause, it changes the experience fundamentally. Turning an SRPG battle from turn-based to real-time transforms it from a cerebral experience where you take your time and exercise total control over your moves into one where you're constantly scrambling to manage characters following outdated orders, stuck on the terrain from pathfinding issues, or acting against your wishes entirely based on their AI. Going real-time changes the experience so completely that I think it demands a different genre. Note though, I do make an exception for Unicorn Overlord on this. I think it manages to squeak by this requirement because, although its movement is real-time with pause, it's only movement that behaves like this. The actual combat exchanges occur in a turn-based, stepwise fashion. To me at least, this feels close enough to let it slide. And with that, I think we have our definition. An RPG is a game where you command one or more persistent, unique characters who continually improve over the course of the game as a direct result of your actions. And an SRPG is an RPG overwhelmingly focused on turn-based tactical battles taking place on 2D or 3D battlefields with varied terrain, where you command multiple characters with distinct combat roles. Now that's a lot of words. If that sounds limiting to you, keep in mind that still leaves a lot of variability in how SRPGs can approach things. For example, are there optional battles the player can use to grind? How many characters can the player field in battle? Are the battlefields large or small? Are they open or filled with choke points? How strong are terrain effects in the game? What kinds of victory conditions will they utilize? Does the game discourage turtling, and if so, how? Does each army go all at once, or do characters go individually based on initiative? How deterministic are the combat mechanics? Is damage randomized or consistent? Is defense subtractive or percentage-based? Is there backstab damage? Are there flanking bonuses, critical hits, elevation effects, environmental hazards, attacks of opportunity? Is death permanent? How does character advancement work? Are characters stuck in their combat roles, or can they switch classes? Are there limitations on class switching? Do characters get to equip armor, or is it just baked into their defense stat? Are there shields, and if so, how do they work? Do characters get their own inventories, or do they share a pool of consumable items? How are the classes balanced? Are there promotions? And if so, what triggers them? Does the player then get to choose the advanced class? Are all of the characters unique, or are there generic recruits? Etc., etc., etc. And trust me when I say that I've only scratched the surface here. There is still plenty of design variability left for SRPGs to explore. Chapter 4 is, an SRPG. With our new definition in hand, let's take it for a test run. Let's look at some games and see if they meet our standard for an SRPG. We'll start with Advance Wars. Is Advance Wars an SRPG? The answer to that is no. You don't control even a single unique or persistent character. Everyone you control on the battlefield is a nameless, identical, replaceable copy who vanishes forever the moment a battle ends. And most of your units aren't even characters. They're squads who suffer attrition. And what's more, no one improves over the course of the game. No matter how many fights they survive or enemies they vanquish, your units remain exactly the same. It's a turn-based tactics game, but it is absolutely not an RPG. And therefore, it isn't an SRPG. Is Wargroove an SRPG? No. This is almost exactly the same as Advance Wars, except that the setting has been swapped to high fantasy, and you have a single named commander on the field. But your commander is the only unique persistent unit. Everyone else is identical and replaceable. And here too, no one ever levels up or improves. It may have a fantasy setting, but it's not an RPG. And if it ain't an RPG, it ain't an SRPG. Is Diofield Chronicle an SRPG? No. It's not turn-based, for one thing. You're forced to herd cats in every fight. What's more, you never control more than 4 characters, which is pretty weak by SRPG standards. And when you combine those two things, the result is that Diofield Chronicle is basically just Baldur's Gate 1 with less role-playing. In my opinion, it doesn't possess the features to offer a quintessentially SRPG experience, and so it isn't an SRPG. Is Baldur's Gate 3 an SRPG? This one is more debatable than the others. It is an RPG, and you do engage in a lot of quite decent turn-based tactical combat, but I still think the answer is no here, and the reason is that there's another genre that fits it better: WRPG. Remember when I was talking about Tim Kaine and his definition of an RPG, where the game offers you a lot of different approaches to resolving its problems? Baldur's Gate 3 fits that paradigm to a T, and that's the defining characteristic of a WRPG. Remember, to be an SRPG, the game needs to be overwhelmingly focused on tactical battles. If you can consistently resolve conflicts in an RPG by talking or sneaking instead of engaging in tactical fights, then what you have is a WRPG first and foremost. Side note, I'm probably going to get comments about this, so I'll just say this up front. People have started calling these games CRPGs over the past few years. I have no idea why. WRPG is the subgenre name I grew up with for this type of game, and I'm just gonna keep using that. Is Pool of Radiance an SRPG? This is an interesting one to consider because Pool of Radiance came out in 1988, 2 years before Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. What's more, Pool of Radiance was massively influential. You can trace a direct line from Pool of Radiance to Baldur's Gate 3. And Pool of Radiance is absolutely an RPG. In fact, in a sense, it's the RPG, implementing rules from 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And it definitely asks that you spend a lot of time on turn-based tactical battles in 2D space with variable terrain, where you control numerous characters in a variety of classes. But at the end of the day, I think Pool of Radiance isn't an SRPG for the same reason as Baldur's Gate 3. It's just much more of a WRPG. Pool of Radiance offers ways to resolve quests through sneaking or dialogue. In fact, you can parley with most enemies and potentially talk your way out of combat. What's more, the mechanics in this game require you to spend quite a lot of time wandering around mazes in first person. All in all, I don't think you can say it focuses on tactical battles to the extent that core SRPGs do. Like Baldur's Gate 3, Pool of Radiance is a WRPG first and foremost. Is Sword of Aragon an SRPG? Nope. Sword of Aragon is from SSI, the very same company that made Pool of Radiance. Sword of Aragon came out in 1989, 1 year after Pool of Radiance and 1 year before Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. In Sword of Aragon, you do command unique, named, persistent characters who level up and improve through battle, and it is overwhelmingly focused on turn-based battles in 2D space with variable terrain. The problem with Sword of Aragon is that it's really a strategy game, not a tactics game. The scale of the battles is all wrong. The very first fight in the game has you facing off against 400 orcs. As you might imagine, this doesn't leave much room for characterization. Your units just don't have unique portraits or dialogue, and most are in fact squads rather than distinct characters. Moreover, they can be replaced by mustering new troops in cities, much like in Wargroove or Advance Wars. Just in general, Sword of Aragon has much more focus on macro-level resource management. Although Sword of Aragon didn't really influence the SRPG genre, it almost certainly did exert a lot of influence on a different genre, the 4X. Age of Wonders 4, Fallen Enchantress, Heroes of Might and Magic. These are 4X games, and they are very much in the Sword of Aragon lineage. But SRPGs? Not so much. Is the Battle for Wesnoth an SRPG? The Battle for Wesnoth presents us with a close call. It's very focused on turn-based tactics with 2D positioning and differing terrain, and every unit is a distinct named character who usually persists in the maps to come. Still, the RPG side of things in Wesnoth is shaky. In any given campaign, you have only a small handful of truly unique characters, with most just being Advance Wars-style generics, albeit with a name and 2 minor distinguishing traits chosen from a small pool of possibilities. But then again, you can hire generics in Final Fantasy Tactics, Fell Seal, or Unicorn Overlord, so the reliance on generics isn't enough to disqualify Wesnoth on its own. Now, the thing that really makes me question Wesnoth's RPG credentials is that there isn't any continuous development of your characters. There's no regular leveling up or training, only promotions to higher tiers of the same class that, for most characters, can only happen 2 times ever. If that's enough to make it an RPG, then so is Civilization V, and Civilization V ain't an RPG. Compare this to Final Fantasy Tactics or Fell Seal. Even if you are running hired generics for all your battles, in those games, you'll still be continuously shaping them into unique characters by leveling them up at regular intervals and getting them distinct stat spreads and sets of skills. If they die and you hire a replacement, you're going to spend time continually differentiating the replacement. Your ability to do that in Wesnoth is really limited by comparison. I'm going to rule this one borderline, but if you put a gun to my head and told me to pick yes or no, I'd probably say no. The disposability of your characters and reliance on churning out replacements mid-battle just doesn't quite produce what I would consider an SRPG experience, but your mileage may vary. Is Fire Emblem Three Houses an SRPG? Yes, absolutely. It's overwhelmingly focused on tactical battles in 3D terrain and only secondarily with developing your characters to prepare for them. But what about the monastery, you might ask? Three Houses does have an explorable home base, where you can perform small tasks to increase social bonds between your characters and provide some temporary boosts to their stats. While this does tend to suck up a lot of playtime, it's just another part of developing your characters to prep for the battles. And it's largely optional. Players can, and do, regularly skip the monastery bits entirely to focus on the part you can't skip, the turn-based tactical battles. Fire Emblem Three Houses has a few strategy game trappings, but these are largely cosmetic. For instance, you can hire battalions to accompany you into battle, but these behave more like equipment for your characters than they do actual independent battlefield units. You can assign a battalion to support a character, and it'll boost a stat or two and give them access to a special move, sometimes a passive effect, but that's pretty much it. You don't have to pay them a continual salary, and you can never move or even field a battalion independent of a unique named character. On the other hand, characters can fight without any battalion at all just fine. Unique, named, persistent characters who level up and improve throughout the game, not the battalions, remain the agents you actually manage and the agents you actually control to interact with the fights. Fire Emblem Three Houses is an SRPG. Now, I want to be very clear here. There is nothing wrong with a game not being an SRPG. It doesn't make it bad. It just means it offers a different kind of experience. And that's okay. It's better for everyone when people use the correct terminology to refer to game genre. Better for customers, who will have an easier time finding the games they want. And better for developers, whose audiences will be able to find their work without being buried in irrelevant results. I love SRPGs. They've been a passion of mine for decades, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. My hope is that with this video, I can help a new generation of players to understand and appreciate the SRPG genre just as much as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and either way, please comment below to let me know what you think. And finally, for those of you who stuck it out to the end, I want to tell you about my new SRPG, Together in Battle, now out in early access on Steam. Together in Battle is a full-fledged strategy RPG with a story-driven campaign, time management mechanics, and a social sim layer. Each day, you'll have 2 time points to spend. You can fight in the arena, send characters away on quests, shop, recruit new allies, and investigate the main plot. At night, you'll return to camp and watch your characters' personalities come alive as they talk, pursue their interests, and build relationships with one another. You're the boss. You get to decide how each day is spent. But your choices matter. To succeed, you'll want to make every day count. Together in Battle's turn-based tactical fights reward creativity and good positioning, not just lucky die rolls. With a deterministic core that never wastes your time, Together in Battle's combat nonetheless features incredible depth. Elevation effects, knockbacks, environmental hazards, backstabbing, destructible environments, defensive terrain, the ability to lay traps, build bridges and barricades, extreme turn flexibility, an unlimited undo stack, cunning AI, and more. It's all here. All your characters are different. Every character you recruit has distinct traits, personal histories, beliefs, hobbies, and secrets. And these differences matter. A jokester may do funny impressions to boost morale. A hunter may boost your stocks of food with wild game. A baker may use food to produce cookies and cakes you can eat or sell. A gambler may visit bars around town and win money for you. Some characters are prone to depression, some to self-doubt. Some of them self-soothe with long walks or prayer. Others undertake long-term projects, like growing vegetables, forging weapons, or writing novels. Learn what makes each character tick as they grow and form powerful bonds of friendship. You won't see everything Together in Battle has to offer in a single playthrough. Or two. Every game offers a new experience. Together in Battle includes 24 base classes, with branching promotions for a total of 72 distinct character classes. A trainer you can use to shore up your character's skills, or simply multi-class them. More than 175 skills in the game. 6 playable species. Dozens and dozens of random events and side quests that can play out in multiple different ways. A near limitless variety of unique, procedurally generated characters. Hundreds of thousands of possible procedurally generated weapons and pieces of armor, including unique and personal weapons. A jobs board with randomized quests where you can hire characters out to earn money. Together in Battle is available in early access right now, and will be releasing to version 1.0 in spring 2025. I do hope you'll come check it out. Thanks for watching and thanks for caring. I'll see you on the battlefield.